Welcome. Good afternoon, everybody. We felt that this is a topic that has to be on the agenda of the Spanish Agile community. We're going to do the talk in English so that people who are visiting us can understand, but this is really intended for the Agile community of Spain to have the topic of reinventing organizations in teal to be on the plate of this conference. Okay, this is why we asked to give a lightning talk. It's going to be a short talk that introduces the problem and the proposed solution. And here we are with Tiago, who's going to start.
Okay, so for all of us that have been working with Agile, we understand like the principles and the practices, and we see it with teams going really, really well. And when we try to think about how this would mean for an organization, what this means when an organization does it for a whole, we usually imagine something like this, right? We want to be fast and nimble. It's something beautiful. But in a lot of the organizations that we see and that we're working with, we end up with something like this, right? You have teams that are doing a lot of great work, but they're burdened by some of the legacy in the organization, okay? Which brings us to the topic we wanted to talk about. So the book on reinventing organizations.
So this book came out in 2014. We believe it's an important book. We're going to explain why in a few minutes. But this book, what it's doing is it's rounding out a bunch of case studies that are out there today, which try to attack the problem that Tiago just positioned. Okay, the problem is clear. We have discovered a new way of working, agile software development, agile product development. We do not have organizations that are structured in order to support this way of working. The organizations today are, the organizational design is based on outdated models. So what this book is trying to position is an experiment. Okay, this is what we're going to be talking about today is what is the current state of the art of experiments in organizational design trying to crack the problem of what does an agile organization look like.
And the models that they go through in the book, before we get to the teal model, which is the one we want to talk about. So he talks about that we go through paradigms in society. So we went through the red paradigm, where it was, it was a constant exercise of authority to keep people in line. Fear is what kept people in line. It's like the mafia type of organization, right? It's division of labor, command, and authority. You move to amber, where you have the pyramid hierarchy is introduced. It's more like the Catholic Church. They introduce formal roles and processes. The metaphor they use there is the army. From there we move to orange, which is where most organizations are nowadays, okay? And they talk about you focus on competition, profit, and growth. The innovation they brought about, or the breakthroughs they brought about, are innovation, accountability, meritocracy. And then you have some organizations today already in the green paradigm, which is, an example would be Southwest Airlines or Zappos or companies like those. And the breakthroughs they talk about are empowerment, value-driven culture, the stakeholder model, so it's not just about shareholders, but it's about the whole stakeholders you have. And the next evolution from green would be the teal paradigm, okay? And teal is, the metaphor they use there is for a living organization, a living system. It's cutting off the bottom. And teal stands on 3 legs. There's 3 breakthroughs in teal.
All right, so.
And Xavier will talk about the first one.
Now, here's where we get a little bit subjective, okay? There's 3 legs of teal, and my personal opinion is that the first leg is the only one that really matters. The other 2 are a little bit fluffy, and I'll let Tiago talk about them afterwards. But the first leg, the controversial one and the important one, is no managers. Now, let's get this straight for a minute, okay? What we're saying here is that there is a bunch of case studies and a bunch of organizations that are seriously putting on the table organizational models that have no hierarchy, no bosses, no hay jefes. There's no management structure, okay? And they are obviously not some kind of crazy communist, terrorist, bunch of rogue developers who are talking about this. We're talking about people who are at the top of the organizations who are proposing these models. Okay? And so these models, obviously, they need to be able to address the same problems that are being addressed by a management structure and a hierarchy, right? So what we're going to be exploring here is how does it work? How do they do it? Well, we're not really going to explore in depth because it's a lightning talk, but you need to understand that the key challenges that a management structure was designed to address, such as, for example, creating strategy and vision, making decisions, telling people what to do, providing accountability. All of these things are being addressed in a way that does not require bosses. Okay? And this is a breakthrough. This is it's an experiment, remember. It's not proven to work yet. What we have is some interesting case studies where it is working or it has worked. So we need to study these case studies, and we need to try to understand if this is really something that is going to be applicable to as a pattern to a broad range of organizations, or if it's something that has only worked in certain specific circumstances. This is what the book is doing.
And Xavier kind of stole my thunder, right, talking about the important one. But if you have no managers, and if you have an organization that's self-managed, there's two other breakthroughs that they talk about which come probably as a result of that, right? The first one being that's this wholeness principle. So people no longer have to wear masks in the organization, right? They're free to be themselves because they're taking ownership. They're taking ownership for what they're doing over there, okay? So you have things like, they're decorating their office spaces, and they have different meeting rituals and how they handle conflict. All that comes as probably a result of not having any managers, right? Or managers. And the other thing that comes as a result of that is evolutionary purpose. So it's not that there is a strategy clearly defined up front, this is exactly everything we want to do. The purpose of the organization emerges from this self-management that happens, okay? And which means that they're finding out their purpose as they're going along, as they're serving themselves and society as a whole and trying to improve. Now, we mentioned that this is experimental, right? One of the reasons we wanted to bring up this topic here is exactly because of that. We want people to start thinking about the implications of this, right? But there are companies, and the book is a great example of that, as Xavier was mentioning. They present some interesting case studies of companies that are already pulling this off. And you have companies from a variety of different sectors. You have schools, non-profit organizations, you have companies in the energy sector with 40,000 employees. My personal favorite, I think you agree, Favi, like the metal manufacturer. Some of them are close by. Favi is in France. Putzorg, it's in the Netherlands. It's a healthcare network of nurses. And all these companies are they're TO companies. They're doing all these things we're talking about. Like, they don't have managers. Their employees come with wholeness to the office, and their purpose is evolving as they're working through
And
it.
obviously, the design of the organization is completely different than any traditional hierarchy. And you've probably heard about some authors talking about concentric circles or graph network types. So this is what these organizations look like when you try to come up with something that resembles an organigram. Right? Most of the time, especially the larger organizations, because you can see there that there are some pretty large organizations, right? It says AES doesn't exist anymore, but when it did, it was a 40,000 people employee, and the reason it doesn't exist is because it was acquired and merged. It's not that it went broke, okay? Buurtzorg does exist in the Netherlands right now, fastest growing healthcare provider in the Netherlands, a real case study that you can see right now today. And most of these very large organizations, what they really look like is a network of small organizations. And this is really the pattern that we've been seeing also for scaling Scrum and other type of things we're doing. It's typically you try to not scale, right? You try to depend more on the power of the network and not the power of the efficiency of mass whatever, right? So there's some very interesting case studies here in the book. And of course, we don't have time in this one to cover them in detail, but you should, if you're really interested in understanding how it works, how they manage to do the things that you need to get done, like, for example, make decisions and HR and all these typically difficult topics that depend on management, read the book.
And we highlight a couple of points here, like what steps are these companies taking to get to TO? Like, so what are organizations doing? The first thing, or one of the things they talk about in the book, is this leadership bottleneck, right? That you can't have a teal organization if there's no support, or like if the senior most managers and the CEOs and people like that don't get it.
And here we're really, you need to obviously understand that we're talking about ownership support. So it's not even senior management, right? You need the support of the ownership to be able to put in place something like this. Because in the most extreme cases, there is no senior management. There's not even I mean, we are speculating with scenarios where there is not even a CEO, or there might not even be a board of directors.
And it's one of the reasons...
Highly speculative, but...
It's one of the reasons that one of those companies is no longer Teal in the example we gave, is they were a publicly owned company, or a publicly traded company, and when a problem happens, at one point in time, the shareholders just say, okay, enough of this Teal stuff, right? And that's the risk, right? If you don't have ownership support, it goes away, it can be killed. And that's the thing you need to have in place. The other thing that's critical to all of them is, okay, there are no managers, so how does stuff get done? How do we decide things? And you get into concepts like consent, the advice process, so you're not asking for permission anymore, you're seeking advice from people, everybody gets free to take initiative. It's the way to handle decisions in a different type of way, right?
It's a key piece of the puzzle. How do you make decisions when there's no hierarchy, right? So this is very interesting, right?
And it's not easy to put in practice sometimes, and we're trying this right now. And it's
basically just to give a little bit of a hint of what is being proposed is anybody can propose any initiative, and they seek advice. And if there's nobody who is against it, opposing it with strong arguments, the initiative can go ahead. Okay, and this is at all levels, and people naturally gravitate towards the type of decisions that they are comfortable making, right? So I want to say something that I didn't mention before. No managers doesn't mean no management, and it definitely doesn't mean no leadership. Okay, so what we're actually doing is we're taking all of the good qualities of our current managers. So we take our good managers and we turn them into leaders, and we allow them to express their leadership more freely. And of course, we also try to capture the autonomy and the initiative of people who did not previously have a management role or management title. So we try not to lose all of the positive qualities that make a good manager today. Okay. And this is a part of the key, I think one of the keys of the puzzle. I feel very comfortable today proposing things, even if I have no formal authority to get them to happen, right? Anybody can object. If the objection is reasonable, it won't get done. It might make you a little bit slower, but it does make you a lot more resilient.
And to make clear the use of words, we talked about consent, not consensus, which is something that typically doesn't work.
Consensus means everybody has to agree, or a majority has to agree. Consent means there's no justifiable opposition.
Yeah.
Okay, so you need to...
And the other thing is this idea of size doesn't matter, right? Because when you try to think about this working in practice, we tend to think, okay, this would work in smaller organizations. But we see companies with 40,000 employees, and they manage to pull this off, okay? Now, what a pattern you do see in place in those companies, of course, is like Xavier was talking about before, they're split up into these, smaller cells. So they have AES, the energy company. Every country that had one of the plants, those plants operated semi-independently, basically. They operated as independent cells. You have this more network structure to the companies. So, why does all this matter?
Well, obviously, it matters because we're saying that these organizational designs might be more appropriate for doing agile, right? They are more compatible with the practices and the philosophy of teamwork, of transparency that we embody in our agile development. But it also matters. I think that's the reason why if it works, it will be very relevant. Now, the thing is that today, especially, it's relevant because there's a lot of things happening. It's kind of converging, right? This book came out last year. That is one of the most important high potential frameworks for implementing this, because the book doesn't talk about, the book is not proposing a framework. The book is just documenting case studies. So there's many different frameworks. For example, holacracy, or for example, sociocracy 3.0, which is currently under development. A lot of these, this is like the early days before the Agile Manifesto. Imagine that you are 15 years ago, you're a bunch of developers doing object-oriented programming in a waterfall way, and you go to a conference where somebody says, we've documented a bunch of case studies of people doing something very different, XP, Scrum, Crystal. I think that we are at the same phase in time regarding agile organizational design. if it works. It's a big if, but there's growing evidence that it does work. So it is a very important.
But it's why we think exactly this is important to bring up. It's unlocking new potential models in organization design, which is very exciting for us. So thank you very much.
Normally,
I
there's
think
no
we don't
time
have
for
time for
questions
questions.
in lightning talks, but you can always, if you're really interested in this and you want to hear a little bit about our current experience, please do approach us. We are very approachable.
I am
Approach us
at
in
least.
yeah. He's the tall guy. We're very approachable, and we will be in the hallways. And do we have time for questions? And we can do the questions in Spanish if you want.
Hi there. I know Tiago personally. We have been doing or trying to do something together. My question is, how do you embrace the fact that no managers, because I'm trying to do that. I'm always saying I'm not a boss. I actually have 40 people under my radar. But, you know, it's kind of convincing my team was easier than convincing the management. And when I say to my boss, you're not my boss, you're my dude, then it comes to the fact where he says, no, I'm your boss. No, you have the responsibility to lead me. But how do you embrace a company, and where do you put that seed? Or where do you think is the best place to put the seed towards, you know, making the change on a 40,000 employees business?
Well, I just wanted to be very clear that we are not in no way claiming that there is today a clear path to transition a traditional organization to this. Okay, this is not the case. There are some case studies in the book that have transitioned from traditional hierarchical based to teal.
But all those case studies are when ownership said, basta.
It starts at the top.
We're not doing this anymore.
Or
We
a new
don't have bosses
CEO,
anymore.
for example, a new CEO comes in, he looks at the organization, he says, this is a mess, we're going to try and experiment something new. Nobody is a manager anymore, there's no more hierarchy. And we start from there. So I don't know I don't know what is the way to, if you're in the middle, or even worse, if you're at the bottom, I don't know what the path is to try to convince the guys from the top. We don't know. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.